We're ready now? All right, thanks, Bill. Good evening, everybody. Hello. Good to be. Um, let's have a conversation first and foremost tonight on this topic that I'm calling the five acts of God, fractality, and forgetfulness. And we're going to be clear on all of that as we move along. We're going to be looking at this teaching that talks about how everything is really just repeating itself on different scales of creation, and everything is cyclical and seasonal. So if you look at your life, you realize you've been going through cycles of growth and development. You've been living your life. We've been living our lives through seasons and calendars. We just had Veterans Day. Thanksgiving's coming up. We're in the Christmas season, and when we walk in the stores, everything is patterned on these cycles and seasons. Everything. We woke up this morning. We have a circadian rhythm of 24-hour cycles, the way our hormones and neurotransmitters and everything fires. We get drowsy at a certain hour, and then we go to sleep. And then we do it all again the next day. We cycle 24 hours, 7 days, right? 30 days or 31 days in a month. Everything is cyclical and seasonal. Everything. So the ancients knew this. All those sacred traditions talk about this. And what we're going to look at today is how this also reflects our inner states as well, and how we have these periods of inner growth and development and change, and then we go through these processes of moving from one stage of development to the next. But what we also want to factor in, because at a certain point, and if we're here this evening or listening to these teachings, we go through a change, not just, from adolescence to adulthood kind of a change, but in terms of how we define our identity kind of a change, right? We're talking about like this awakening into our spiritual identity. And the five acts of God that is taken from the Eastern teachings of Hinduism, particularly in the non-dual teachings, we have a very important element in terms of the way that choice is involved in either choosing to awaken or choosing to stay asleep. Okay, so we'll get into all of that. We're also going to be looking at the Upanishads this evening and see how these play into our experience that, yes, there's a part of us that is going through these cycles and changes and growth and development, right? We've identified as that. But there's a part of us that doesn't change. There's a part of us that actually is outside of time. This is what the sacred teachings talk about. There's a part of us that is actually always simply witnessing. And as we tune into this witnessing state, which is right here, right now, we begin to undergo this transformation or this change. Our identity begins to shift from the wanderer that's going through development and change and is identified with the calendar and the seasons and the cycles. And we're also finding that there's a part of us that is still and aware and awake. And this is called the witness consciousness. And what the Upanishads are saying is that as we begin to tune in more and more through meditation, calming down the mind, paying attention to the witness, which is really the state of I am, right? I am, where you're saying I am from. If you really feel into that, that is your witness. So this is why the spiritual path is so surprising, because you realize you've been seeking for yourself. You've been longing for what you already are. And we've forgotten that. We've gotten lost in cycles, in seasons, and identification with what is always changing, right? We started identifying with the body at birth. And we have, up until now, gone through these major changes of body identification. As we mentioned before, when you're looking in the mirror at 3 years old, The same witness is looking back at you now as you go to the mirror. And you just think, well, this is who I am now at 63 or 73. But there's something timeless and changeless about the one who's identifying with the 3-year-old body self that you were and the 63 or 73-year-old body self that you were. So we're actually lost to ourselves. Meditation is a way of calming down the mind, controlling the outward direction of the senses, bringing the senses and the mind inside and letting them rest, get quiet. And that's when the light of the I am, or the light of the self, becomes more and more realizable. You could feel it. You could sense it. You can intuit it. And it's really you. It's the I am that's just been forgetting itself. And so when we come home to this experience, we actually undergo this major change, as it says in the Upanishads, and we'll be looking at that in a few minutes. We can also look at what we were just talking about, how the body has gone through these changes. And for many of us, we are in the winter or maybe the autumn season of our life, right? We've gone through the summer of youth and the spring of our early adulthood. You know, we've sown our seed or produced our seed, kind of a thing, in the spring. Now the leaves are starting to change, or maybe the leaves are beginning to fall off the trees of our life. So you can see even the body is finding this type of seasonal or cyclical change. And as we talked about it last week, the ancient Vedic culture of India was in harmony with these deeper patterns or cycles. And what they said was at a certain point, when autumn begins to hit your life, you've reached this place now where you're in your later adult years, approaching your senior years. You've done all you're going to do in the world, educating, family, marriage, wealth, career. And then now it's time, as autumn begins to dawn and winter sets in, to really look at who you are as this witness. This was built into the culture. And one of the things that we see then is that we sometimes will feel this instinctually, that we hit a certain stage of our life and we begin to see through what was once attractive or appealing to us in our youth, or even 10, 15 years ago, and we no longer look at the goals and desires that we once had as really fulfilling or worth pursuing and investing so much time and energy in. We actually feel this need to go within, to really investigate this mystery of my own consciousness. And so we'll look at that as well. One of the things I do want to start out with, which I find fascinating, is how in the early chapters of Genesis we have this cycle language and these repeating pattern languages. And just a sample of what I mean by that, where it says in Genesis that God said, and God called the dry land earth. This is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 10. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of it the waters. He called the seas, and God saw it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the next verse simply repeats this. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw it was good. And the evening and the morning were day 2. So you have here something very interesting. This is the fractality and the what's called recursion, or the repetition of these patterns, that everything replicates itself. And that is what, fractality, if you're familiar with it, you see it like on paisley ties, or if you're familiar with Mandelbrot sets, you're familiar with what are called the Fibonacci spirals in creation. So let's look at that for a moment. This was a big awakening for me about 30 years ago when I discovered the Fibonacci. And what the Fibonacci is are these spirals that show up within all organic life. And when you mathematically lay out the spiral, it is the phi ratio or the phi ratio. And this ratio of the spiral and this mathematical pattern of 0, 1, 3, 5, 8, 13, on and on it goes, forms that spiral mathematically. It was built into every sacred temple, every sacred site. So they knew about this. And what it shows us is at every scale, this pattern of life, this mathematical spiral is at play. And this goes on with the way a fetus develops in the womb. It goes on with how pineapples form. It goes on with how artichokes form. It goes on, you'll see the phi ratio, how leaf patterns form on a stalk. You'll see it in nautical shells. You'll see it in the spiral arms of a galaxy. So from the galaxy down to the fetus, down to the way that a sprout comes out of the ground, you have this ever-repeating pattern of this deep structure or design that is within all organic life. And so what begins to show up then is that there is this one thing, this one self, this one energy that keeps replicating itself at every scale. And so we all have this within us, as the herbs and the grasses of the field are ever replicating themselves, right? And so what we find then is this pattern of the seed within itself. This is the fractality, this is the spiral, the recursion that's going on over and over and over again. And so when we talk about the 5 acts of God, this is really what we're getting at, that it's as above, so below, as within, so without. These patterns are always going on. And the pattern found in the 5 acts of God is there is a creation or a emission or a coming to be. So when we talk about the seed yielding itself, like everything has seed, and the seed produces its kind. Well, this wasn't lost on the Egyptian teachings where their creator God created through emission of seed, that the universe is an emission or a big bang of seed. So everything starts with the seed. And so the patterning that starts at the divine level continues all the way down to the human and to all the animal kingdom. And this is the first stage, is the emission, which is the first act of God. The emission or creation then goes into a preservation or an enduring. And then there goes a dissolution or a dissolving back down or a death. And then you have, in the 4th act of God, either concealment or forgetting. And the 5th act is revealing or remembering, which is also associated with grace. So within our experience of being human, we have gone through these cycles, like we're saying. We start out as a seed. We develop and grow in the womb. We have this spiral pattern of the little zygote. That is a Fibonacci spiral. As we come out of the womb, Leonardo da Vinci saw this in his Vitruvian Man. If you look at the Vitruvian Man of Da Vinci, it's all set to the phi ratio or the Fibonacci spiral, because the length of our arms and legs and torso forms the phi ratio. Our finger ratios form the phi ratio. Everything is set within this deeper structure or spiral, or they call it the mathematics of God, right? So we're set within these cycles. We think we're really unique as our separate self and our story, but we're actually these recurring patterns in creation. We keep repeating. And we're following laws that really are at the heart of who we are, and we don't really know it. Like we obey the cycles of the day and the night. We obey the calendar, so to speak. So it also stands that we are in this creation, maintenance, dissolution cycle. Everyone is born from the seed. We grow and develop. We last a little while, and then we begin our denouement, and then we go into our conclusion. Right? We finish, and this will repeat again, and repeat again, and repeat again. And the Eastern teachings especially saw this very clearly. Buddha saw this very clearly. And it was referred to as the wheel of life, or samsara. And what samsara is are ever repeating cycles. And it gets to a point where you're like, is there a way off this thing? Is there a way that I don't have to come back as a zygote and do this whole thing again, or maybe come back as, a worm, and some schools think that you could, transmigrate into different species? Is there a way off this ride? And this is where the fourth and the fifth acts of God are introduced. The fourth act is what we were just saying, that there's a concealment or a forgetting. And so in every instant, this is where it gets to be really juicy for us. Every instant, we're going through these cycles also. Remember, it scales all the way up. It scales all the way down, and it's also scaling with days, months, years, right? If you look at the 5 books of Moses, you have the 7 days, and then you celebrate the Sabbath, and then you do 7 years, and then you celebrate this big Sabbath, and then 7 times 7 is 49. So on your 49th year, you have the Jubilee, and everyone's off of the hook when it comes to debt. Everybody gets their property back. This is a Jubilee. It's a letting go, a freedom part of the cycle, right? This is what we're talking about. Everything goes through these cycles all the way down, not just to your day of 24 hours, but you're doing microcycles right now, like nanosecond cycles. That's why if you really get into meditation and you're quiet, you'll actually see how everything's coming and going in like these very fast pixels. Your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, everything is blinking in and out of the void in a cycle. It blinks in, it stays for a moment, and then it blinks out and it dissolves. Now the fourth and the fifth act is what we really want to focus on here, because that's where you have the choices to make as the decision maker. You can realize that within each of these moments of the cycle, you can stay asleep and forget, which in the Sanskrit is tirodhana, the forgetting, the concealing, the hiding. So it all means the same thing. Tirodhana, forgetting, concealing, hiding. Or you can have the anugraha. You can have the grace of waking up, revealing, coming out of the dream cycles. Every instant is that juncture, what Jesus in A Course in Miracles would call the holy instant. That's why he'll say, the miracles of God don't depend on time. They depend on willingness. So we've been slaves to the calendar. We've been slaves to these cycles within cycles and seasons, right? We're totally identified with them. And so we think enlightenment must follow in some way where it's not yet. And what we're getting at now is that it's every moment, it's every instant that you would choose to wake up. That begins to set in motion what your deep driving desire is. So if you now know you have an option in every moment to choose enlightenment thoughts or enlightenment feelings, to choose to connect to the presence of God, which is always right here, right now, or to avoid it, forget it, turn your face away from it. You realize everything is being given according to your desire. Whatever your deep driving desire is, that is reflected in what's showing up in your life. And so as we go through this cycle of birth, aging, old age, and death, we will, according to our deep driving desire, begin another cycle. And it's conditioned by what you've chosen here and now and over the course of your life. This is what the ancient masters were looking at and understanding for themselves. Your choices, your thoughts, what you choose to identify as, is what's going to condition your next cycle. You could look at yourself right now. Your physical body in these teachings is referred to as the food body. And so your physical body is literally what you ate. Your mental body is what you ate in terms of your thinking. Everything that you are right now is a result of your past choices. Everything. So your future, whatever that's going to look like, is really just the accumulation of your choices that you're making from here on out. That's why it's always good news to realize you're not a victim of your past. Your past can actually be done now. If you choose again, you'll set a different course. Right? And as we've been saying with the meditation path, the course will go inward and will begin to desire, right? Your deep driving desire is to know, who am I? What is this consciousness that I am? So a little bit here about these 5 acts of God. It says the 5 acts of creation, sustenance, dissolution, concealment, and grace, might seem to be grand cosmological processes, distantly removed from everyday life. So how is it that the performance of all 5 acts reveals the ultimate reality of who one really is? The teaching says that our universe exhibits self-similarity, like a snowflake or a fractal, with the same patterns repeating on all levels, as above, so below, as within, so without, as here, so elsewhere. Thus, the 5 acts are involved in the universal process, precisely the same movements of our individual process as well. Our moment-to-moment experience of reality can be described in terms of these 5 things. It says, finally here, so you are performing the 5 acts of God within yourself all day, every day. You create your thoughts, you hold them, dissolve them, and choose to reveal or conceal what's really going on and who is really in charge, and then create again. You're always doing one of these 5 things. Whether you are responding to external or internal stimuli, you manifest the objects of awareness that create your specific experience. You hold on to them, you let them go, and then you choose to repose in your true nature and thus recognize yourself as the divine author of the whole process, or to overlook your true self and the divine author of the whole process. Instead, look to the next thing that might give you pleasure in an endless cycle. If you choose the former, you choose empowerment, to recognize that the space of expanded self-awareness between thoughts is their unchanging ground, to recognize that there is one eternal perceiver of the arising and dissolving of the 3 cognitive processes, right? The emission or creation, the sustenance or sustainability, and the dissolution. These 3 processes, he's saying, that there's one eternal perceiver. There's one witness experiencing all of it at different scales in different forms. Okay, this is going to really take root as we get into the Upanishad. And he says, you are that perceiver. This is supremely empowering and liberating, for in so doing, you realize that you are always choosing your experience of reality, and you could also choose differently. You are not and never have been a victim of circumstance, for no one else can determine your inner state for you. True choosing can be quite difficult at first because of the power of your subliminal impressions of past experience that influence how we see the present, right? The Sanskrit word for that is samskara. So we have these subconscious patterns that we have bought into already. Right? We've identified as certain people, personality traits, habit patterns, and these are the sort of the autopilot that runs our life. And we kind of go to sleep as these ever-repeating patterns. Now, what's interesting is these ever-repeating patterns, if they're set within the framework of an ego personality, create disharmony and dis-ease in our life. We actually get out of tune from the one perceiver that is the universal self. And so we feel off in our life, not fulfilled, not happy, not at peace. And we want to wake up, we want to choose right, but in the beginning it can be very difficult because we have literally these unconscious impulses to go back into the old ways of thinking, feeling, and being that we're so accustomed to. That's why with meditation and quieting down, you actually thin out and release the charge of these unconscious controllers. You actually begin to see through what they're doing in the present moment. Oh, there it is. But now I have a little space between that reaction that comes up from my subconscious and who I'm choosing to be. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to repeat that pattern with this person who triggers it in me. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to let that go. So that's taking control of your mind and your senses. It's crucial to waking up. But in the beginning, as we're saying, these impulses are really the foes, the enemies of your choosing rightly. And he says, even so, identifying yourself as the ground of the process of thought instead of your thoughts means that you are no longer at the mercy of those thoughts. You can choose to alter the way you experience reality, for you are the only one who creates and dissolves the cognitions through which you experience reality. You're the Lord or, governess over your kingdom of mind, of thought. You're always at the level of cause. And he says something very important too in our journey inward, that we are not our thoughts. We are the ground in which the thoughts emerge. We are the silent witness always, even though we've forgotten it. We never cease being it. And so as we relax and breathe and slow down for just a few moments, see if you can rest in the ground of simply being the witness. And remember, the witness says, I am. Right? That's the feeling of the witness. It is the I am aware, right? As that openness of awareness. If you say I am this, you fell into samsara. You fell into the cycles and the embodiment of the ego. If I am a man, or I am an American, or I am this, or I am that, I've just forgotten myself. Myself stands above all temporary designations. I am. So you can stay in the meditation of closing your eyes and just listening with the heart, or whatever feels best for you if you'd like to open your eyes. But we're going to just briefly talk about the story of Moses based within this deeper teaching. The word Moses, or the name Moses, I should say, comes from the word to draw out of. That's why it's in the beginning when he's a boy, or baby actually, and the mother puts him in the straw basket and sends him down the Nile River, and Pharaoh's daughter draws him out of the water. She calls him Moses. Right? The Hebrew word is Mashah. And so the drawing out of the waters is something that actually recurs. It is a leitmotif or an ever-repeating pattern in the Hebrew Bible. I can't tell you how often and how significant it is. Right back to the first part of Genesis, the waters are there. And they symbolize chaos. They symbolize the unenlightened state. And so Moses gets drawn out of that. In the Christian Bible, we see this in the act of baptism. We go down into the waters of chaos or the womb and come back up as a new creation in the baptism. We leave the waters, right? So Moses is drawn out of the water, and he then, in his 80th year, he's in the wilderness shepherding, and he comes across this peculiar vision of the burning bush. And he hears the voice say from the bush, Moshe, Moshe, remove your sandals, for whereon thou standest is holy ground. And this removal of the sandals is really what we were just talking about, that we've been walking through life with these familiar patterns, this identity of being the self, right? Moses didn't know who he was at this point, but he's encountering it now in the form of this radiant bush or tree. And the voice that's speaking from the tree refers to itself as I am. This is the witness. And so Moses is confronting the I am. He has ceased from wandering, and now he has accepted who he is as the instrument of God. And from that point on, he enters a different cycle of life. His identity changes, right? And this is what we're getting from the teachings of the Upanishad. So this is taken from the Mundaka Upanishad. And you may have heard this before, like two golden birds perched on the self-same tree, intimate friends, the ego and the self dwell in the same body. The former eats the sweet and sour fruits of the tree of life, while the latter looks on in detachment. So you have two birds, one tree, and one of the birds is flitting about the branches of the tree, eating sweet and sour fruits, pleasure and pain. And it's going from branch to branch, and it's very busy trying to get the fruits of its desires. The other bird sits atop the tree, completely disinterested in what that other bird is doing, and simply watching as the radiant I am, or the radiant witness. And it gets to a point where this little bird, who is the lower self that we walked in as, we identify as this, gets to the point where it maybe has eaten too many bitter fruits on that tree. And it now wants to come back. And as it begins to desire this vision of the I am, it goes back up the tree. And as it begins to encounter this true self that it is, the witness, it actually undergoes a change. It begins to feel like that same presence, that same being. It becomes an instrument of that one self. So it says here, as long as we think we are the ego, we feel attached and fall into sorrow. But realize that you are the self, the Lord of life, and you will be freed from sorrow. When you realize that you are the self, supreme source of light, supreme source of love, you transcend the duality of life and enter the unitive state. Right? So what we're seeing then is we are looking and longing for ourself. And that self is the light itself. It's the love itself. It's the witness in all minds. We can't fathom that as our identity at first. But as we become more and more deeply desirous of that, we begin to let go of all these old habit patterns that have kept us within these cycles of confusion and chaos and seeking but never finding. And we come more and more into harmony with that one self. And we continue to tune our instrument to the frequency of that one self that is patterning all creation. So in the beginning, we might just start to feel more at ease, more harmonious. Things are in flow. I got all green lights on my way to this important appointment. This pattern will show up every way on every scale. If you stay tuning in to this one self that is structuring and patterning all of creation, its love and light will show up in everything you touch, everything you think, everything you do. It will be with you when you go to sleep at night in your dreams. Your dreams will be lit with forgiveness and kindness, etc. Right? So this is the map of the return. We start out always seeking something to fulfill us in the world, the little bird on the tree. And then we come to realize we are really looking for the source of our own consciousness. That's where the love is. That's where the bliss is. And it says this, on this ever-revolving wheel of life, the individual self goes round and round through life after life, believing itself to be a separate creature until it sees its identity with the Lord of love and attains immortality in the indivisible whole. He is the eternal reality, sing the scriptures, and the ground of existence. Those who perceive him in every creature merge in him and are released from the wheel of birth and death. The Lord of love holds in his hands the world composed of the changing and the changeless, the manifest and the unmanifest. The separate self, not yet aware of the Lord, goes after pleasure, only to become bound more and more. When it sees the Lord, there comes an end to its bondage. Right? So the beautiful thing about these teachings is if they are falling upon your ears, if they are being brought into your life now, obviously, because of your desire, right? It took your desire to hear this. It took your desire to drive here and sit here or to turn on your computer and listen. This is generated only because of your desire. Right? Your confidence in knowing that these teachings are offering you something deeper and truer than the world can offer. And you've kind of, at this point, I would think, have seen through the chicanery of the world appearance and are looking for something in the autumn or winter of your life that will really answer the big questions. Who am I? What's it all about? Why all the suffering in the world? Right? All of these big questions come into focus when we begin to see that the world offers nothing. He says conscious spirit and unconscious matter both have existed since the dawn of time, with Maya or illusion appearing to connect them, misrepresenting joy as outside us. When all these three, the consciousness, the material reality, and the illusion that makes us seek outside of ourselves, when all these three are seen as one, the self reveals his universal form and serves as an instrument of the divine will. All is change in the world of the senses, but changeless is the supreme Lord of love. Meditate on him. Be absorbed in him. Wake up from this dream of separateness. Know God, and all fetters will fall away. No longer identifying yourself with the body. Go beyond birth and death. All your desires will be fulfilled in him, who is one without a second. So it's that simple. It's turning to this sense of where the I am is coming from in your consciousness. This is the what Sri Nisargadatta would say is the hole in your mind. He compares it to how like you put a hole in a piece of paper, and that hole isn't the paper, right? The paper has been cut about so that the hole is pierced. There's a hole in our mind where the supreme awareness is shining through. And it's being reflected within the experience of the mind. And that's why it said the ego and the higher self are the best of friends, because when you realize this ego that you walked in as is really just the higher self's light being reflected and distorted within the body identity, when you seek for this higher Lord of love, the light that you are is that light. So you find yourself. You realize you've been this eternal one all along. I and the Father are one. This is the great realization. I thought this was going to be different, that there was going to be some other when I encounter the divine. No, when Moses encounters the divine, he encounters I. The divine says I. You say I. When you've released all the illusions of your misthinking, your I is God's I. Know him to be enshrined in your heart always. Truly, there is nothing more in life to know. Meditate and realize that this world is filled with the presence of God. So when we talk about those final fourth and fifth acts of God to either conceal or to open to grace, right? Everything is going through the cycle of coming into being, abiding for a little while, and dying. But if you're choosing to open to grace, it's like your life can transform from being like a caterpillar to being a butterfly. The choice is a choice for metamorphosis, right? The choice is to undergo a radical shift in identity. The light that you thought you were as the ego self is the light of God. And if you keep deeply desiring the light of God, you become the light of God. This is one of the universal laws. What you deeply desire, you become. That's what drives everything. What you want, you get. What you sow, you reap. It works on every scale in every way. You put your attention and energy into it, and you will reap what you sow. So that light that you are becomes the light of God if you deeply desire it, just like a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. But what has to happen is that everything that is the caterpillar has to dissolve. Those are those deep-rooted samskaras, these patterns in the unconscious that make me think I'm me, right? My memories, my beliefs, my opinions, my past, my story that feels so real. That's my caterpillarness. And every moment I have this choice. Do I insist on being the caterpillar and go through another cycle? Or do I begin to choose to open to grace? And what happens is those caterpillar qualities begin to dissolve, and my life goes into a cocoon. And you can feel very isolated and lonely for a little while because all of your caterpillar buddies and your caterpillar family and the caterpillars that you work with, you can't really relate to them anymore. You begin to feel like there's a different language that you're desiring, a different way of thinking. You're interested in different things, and your old friendships don't seem to work anymore. And this is what happens to that little caterpillar. It begins to release these enzymes when it goes in the cocoon, and those enzymes literally eat up everything that caterpillar was, dissolving it into this pure potentiality. No more caterpillar. The caterpillar dies. And what's beautiful is because it had the desire to be a butterfly, those desires show up as what the scientists call imaginal cells. These imaginal cells have the pattern and the program to form the butterfly out of that soup of pure potentiality. So your life is going through a higher cycle of change. You're going from caterpillar to butterfly, from son of man to son of God, from the mortal to the immortal. This is what's happening within these teachings, and you will experience it if you desire it. And so the Upanishad says this: as a caterpillar, having come to the end of one blade of grass, draws itself together and reaches out for the next, so the self, having come to the end of one life and dispelled all ignorance, gathers in his faculties and reaches out from the old body to a new. As a goldsmith fashions an old ornament into a new and a more beautiful one, so the self, having reached the end of the last life and dispelled all ignorance, makes for himself a new, more beautiful shape, like that of the gods. The self is indeed God, but through ignorance, people identify it with intellect, their thoughts, their senses, their passions, and the elements of the world. This is why the self is said to consist of this and that, and appears to be everything. As a person acts, so he becomes in life. Those who do good become good. Those who do harm become bad. Good deeds make one pure. Bad deeds make one impure. You are what your deep driving desire is. As your desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your action. As your action is, so is your destiny. So do you see how it's auto-generated? You're not a slave to circumstance. You're not the effect of other forces outside of you controlling you. When you are asleep, yes, because you're hiding from yourself. And it will look like other things are controlling you and happenstance is happening to you, and it's unfortunate or fortunate, but you have no control over it. You're caught within this wheel of life. But as you wake up to your hidden power, everything is going according to your desire. We live in accordance with our deep driving desire. It is this desire at the time of death that determines what our next life will be. We will come back to earth to work out the satisfaction of that desire, but not those who are free from the desires of the lower world. They are free because all their desires have found fulfillment in the self, the true I am. Right? So we can begin to repattern our desires and desire only waking up, right? And remember, when we begin to do this, when we begin to redirect our desires to wake up, those old patterns are going to push back because it's a change of identity that we're choosing. As we open to grace, we're actually opening to a new self that didn't exist as the old self that we knew just a moment ago. And so we have to die as the caterpillar dies. So those who don't choose the lower path of the desires of the world find their fulfillment in the self. They do not die like the others, but realizing God, they merge in God. So it is said, when all the desires that surge in the heart are renounced, the mortal becomes immortal. When all the knots that strangle the heart are loosened, the mortal becomes immortal here in this very life. As the skin of a snake is sloughed off onto an anthill, so does the mortal body fall. But the self, freed from the body, merges in God, infinite life, eternal light. So this peace will settle more and more within our life, if it hasn't already, when we are desiring to wake up from this dream. Because as we keep looking without, the world does appear to be getting a bit less enjoyable in some ways. And that is, again, motivation. It's motivation to turn within, because the world actually, as Rumi would call it, is a corpse. There's really nothing here that will last. We won't see this world when our body dies. Everything is dying. And so the choice to wake up is the choice to actually feel peace in this moment, because now our desires are not dependent on this darkening, ever-changing world. They're going to be resting within this steady light and peace and joy of the one self. Right? So I'll leave you with one other thought here. This is the story of Nachiketa. And Nachiketa is a young boy, and he's watching his father perform this ritual sacrifice in ancient India. And the father is giving these old animals to the god of death. And he doesn't think that this is suitable. This is actually an improper ritual. It's a selfish giving. He wants the benefits, but he doesn't want to put in what is quality. He wants to give the bare minimum and get back the riches, right? And Nachiketa sees the dishonesty in that. And so he's bugging his father that that's not moral, that's not right, that's not just, that's not in alignment with the deeper laws. And he says, where do you want to send me? And the father says, go to death, right? Go to hell. And so this is a mythic story of Nachiketa taking his father's instruction and going to the realm of death. And in the story, death isn't home, right? And so Nachiketa's waiting outside of the gates of death for 3 days and 3 nights, which is a cycle. And this is a rebirth cycle, right? So when you have 3, you have this idea of birth and death and then something arising. Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days, etc. So this is a rebirth narrative. And Nachiketa finally meets death, and death says, I'm so sorry. I'm such a poor host. For the fact that I've left you sitting at my gate for 3 days, I will give you 3 boons. Have these 3 wishes, whatever you want. So Nachiketa says, okay, well, I don't want my dad to be upset with me. Okay, you'll have peace with your father. And then what's your next one? Well, I want to learn the fire sacrifice so that I can commune with the greater creation. Okay, we'll teach that to you, and we'll even call it the Nachiketa fire sacrifice. Great. And now what else? Anything you want, young man. Well, you could have, stardom, you can be an influencer, you could be famous, right? And Nachiketa is saying, I don't want any of the wealth of this world. I don't want the notoriety or fame of this world. I want to know what immortality is, because everything in this world is dying. So death's like, well, pick anything else. Don't pick immortality, because he doesn't want Nachiketa to fly to Coop, and now death has no control over him. Nachiketa is like, the pleasures last but until tomorrow, and they wear out. How fleeting is all life on earth. Therefore keep your horses and chariots, dancing and music for yourself. Never can mortals be happy by wealth. How can we be desirous of wealth when we see your face? And know we cannot live while you're here. This is the boon I choose and ask for. Right? This is what happens in the autumn and winter seasons of our life, right? Things start to ache a little bit. You're a little less energetic, and things just start to feel like you're going through that change. Death is getting closer and closer. And Nachiketa sees this already. There's no way that you can get out of being dead. Is there something beyond death? And you have to realize this. It's not just this mythic identity, because I am a Christian, or I am a Buddhist, or I am a Hindu. These are all beliefs, but do you know? Have you experienced it? Has it been revealed? Do you desire it? Do you really desire it? Nachiketa did, because he realizes everything is in the claws of death. What's the point of celebrating here? You're on death row, damn it. So he says, having approached an immortal like you, how can I, subject to old age and death, ever try to rejoice in a long life? For the sake of the senses, fleeting pleasures, dispel this doubt of mine, O death. Does a person live after death, or does he not? Nachiketa asks for no other boon than the secret of this great mystery of life. We're going to leave it there, my friends. Stay tuned for next week. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, you can click the link below and donate to the 5 p.m. service. We thank you for that. Any thoughts? Questions? And a thank you to everyone. Bless the gifts and the givers, and may it be transformed into whatever symbol will bring whoever it touches true wisdom and true happiness. So it is. Amen. All right, let's seal it. Rise, please. Resting within the presence of the heart, where this luminous I am is always radiating its presence of witnessing and watching with total clarity and unshakable changelessness. And as we melt into this presence of pure love at the center of the heart, we realize that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Have a beautiful weekend, my friends. Thank you for being here.